Hello friends, welcome to JavaEE EJB JPA tutorial. Now you are watching part 5 of the subseries JPA relation one-to-one. So in the previous video we created two entities. One is a savings account and location. We modified the savings account entity to add a new field, and we annotated that with @one-to-one annotation, and we also have a containment of location entity for that specific annotation. In this video we will persist this one-to-one mapping to the database. So definitely we will be using the entity manager's persist method, and by this time entity manager knows there are two entities that it is managing. One is the savings account and another one is the location. So after this preview requirement, now we will review the previous parts of the video so that you will get a grab of what you learned in the previous, and we can continue with this current one. So first we learned the theory part. After that we moved to the database changes. Why? Because in our previous subseries we used a savings account, and for this subseries we are making use of the same savings account, and we are introducing a new field here, location ID. Then we added a new table, location. After that, in the next video we created the location entity, because we introduced a new table, right? So we need to create a Java class and make that as a entity supporting, make that as an entity class. So it's just a plain Java class, and by means of these attributes, entity, table, ID, column, with this mapping we will make this location as a entity, JPA entity class. Alright, for the location we have a entity class ready. So we have getters and setters, and we have toString for the location entity. In the previous video we created one-to-one annotation for our savings account. So we learned about the one-to-one annotation and its attributes. So after adding this new annotation, we have a getter and setter for a set location, and we overrode the toString method also on this savings account entity. Now we have two entities, savings account and location. We have a dedicated video for each of this. So in the savings account, so in video X we added the savings account. Then in the next video we referred that, or we place a containment of this location inside the savings account. Then we decorated that with a annotation. The annotation is @one-to-one. Savings account is the source, because that's where we introduced the annotation @one-to-one, and location is the target. So after making those annotation, we created a containment for location, and we have a reference for the location entity also. So this is how we declared. So it's a plain Java, and we kept the annotation one-to-one, join column, all the stuff. So here the savings account, which is containing this location. So the savings account is the source and location entity is the target. So from savings account, the one-to-one mapping goes and it points some location entity. And once the location entity is ready, that will get contained here inside the savings account. That way we will have for a savings account ID, person name, balance, then in which location he lives. So that goes to a separate entity, and from there we will get street and city as well as the ID, location ID. To persist these mapped entities into the database, first we have to populate the location entity. That means we need to create a HTML form, and the HTML form should have two new data. The new data are city and street. That's for the location entity. So after populating the location entity, we need to populate the savings account, and we are already doing that. And the only change what is required here is setting the location. So here in this step we already created the location entity, right? Then we will give that location entity to our savings account. After that we call persist on the source entity. Why? Because the source entity here is savings account, and savings account knows what fields needs to be populated. So savings account will have 3 fields, right? ID we can skip, that's the auto populated one. Then there are 2 other fields that will get persisted to the database. After that there is a mapping field that goes to the target, and from there auto generated field we will leave it. From there it will take city and street, then populates that persist those information to the database. So from savings account we will be ultimately populating the database with person name, balance, location ID. So this ID is required, right, in database to establish the relation. Then in the location we will be having ID, then city and street. We make use of the persistence manager, and we make a call to persist method, and we give the savings account to the persist method. The entity manager knows there exists a relation by looking at the one-to-one mapping. So the moment you give the savings account to the entity manager persist method, it starts, as already told, it starts saving the content to the database, and when it comes to the location, by means of the one-to-one mapping, it knows that there is a relation, and it goes to the target entity and saves the content to the database. Entity manager saves data to both the DB tables. So here both the DB table in the sense of savings account as well as location. So this is our SavingAcBean remote in our remote interface. So this code was added as part of subseries 3. In subseries 3 we are creating new account, right? So creating new account requires only the account holder name and initial balance. Why? Because during that time we have only one database table, SavingAc, and that has 3 fields: ID, account holder name, as well as the balance. So now we modified that, and we have a location ID, and we have one new entity also. So our remote bean method, we will be commenting the code snippet which was added as part of subseries 3 snippet 7. So we are commenting that, and here as part of this current subseries 7 we are adding this method. That means we are modifying this new account. So account holder name same, initial balance same, and we are introducing street and city, and these two informations are for savings account, and street and city are for location. All right, so that's the change on the remote interface. Then we go to our bean implementation method, and we take these two new parameter. So these are all the use it from subseries 3. That means we are making use of the same piece of code from our snippet 3.8. So in subseries 3, first we declared a remote method, then we implemented the new account, right? So we are making use of the same code. So these are all the code from our previous subseries. So as part of previous subseries itself, we are populating our savings account entity. So these are all the fields before this subseries 7, right, on the savings account entity. It contains ID, auto-generated field. We can skip this. P name, and if you see set P name, we are already using that. So we already have this parameter as part of code snippet 3. We are not making any change for that. So P name and balance, so those will get populated. Then em.persist, and we are persisting the account. So here, as part of this new information, if you see, we are adding code snippet 7.9 for this subseries. Here if you see location, so location, here we are creating a new location, then we are setting the city and state. So those are all the incoming parameter, right? So you can see how we are populating the entities. We created a new entity, location, then we are populating city and state. Then here we are making the containment. So account is our savings account dot set location, and it takes the LOC. LOC is nothing but a separate entity. So account is savings account entity. Savings account entity exposes a setter method, set LOC, and that takes LOC. Here we are creating LOC and we are giving that. So what happens here, we have a location field, right? And LOC, the LOC will point to the heap created location instance. So here the location instance is LOC. So till now what you are seeing is the heap snapshot. ID is auto generated, so we can skip this part. P name and balance space will be allocated. Then the entity location will be created. There we will be having the two placeholder to store city and street. here if you see em is our entity manager. We are making call to persist method, and what we are giving to the persist method is the entity account. So the moment you call the persist method towards the end of the business method, here this is the business method, right? Entity manager will push the SQL statement. We know that as part of our previous subseries. So what happens, it will perform the insert. When it is doing the insert, we will be having the database tables, right? One is the location table. So in the location table, in the location table, first it will populate the entries. Say for example, let's say ID 3, city 3 and street 3. So it will get populated. That means it will issue a insert statement to add a new record in the database. Then it will push the savings account content also. So the table tied to this entity is savings AC. Remember, by means of @table and @column, the table as well as the column associations were made already as part of the JPA entity project. Now we are asking to persist savings account. Let's assume that we have value ID auto generated. So let's say take that as for example 6. Then person name, let's say P6 and balance 10, and location, I will come to that later. So here if you see, it already have a location, and here we will be having the ID for our savings account, person 6, then balance value 10. Here if you see, as part of entity, the containment is here. That means it is a complete location and a reference is stored here. That's part of this entity. But when it is persisted in the database, it will hold the mapping column. So entity manager knows by means of that join column, it needs to store 3. So thereby establishing the relation. There are other records also right here. So if you see, based on this column value, why? Because we gave column, join column as a LOC ID, right? So that's how it stores the value when it goes to DB. But when it comes to entity, it will create an instance of the entity, then stores the heap location here, or it stores the reference here as part of savings account. So it's just a plain Java concept of containment, a class instance having reference to other class instance. So the key here is em.persist. So when you perform em.persist and when you give account, since we have 1-to-1 unidirectional mapping, it persists the information on both the table. Not only that, 1-to-1 as well as the cascade type is all. That's what we set, right? So this all includes persist also. That means when some changes is made, it cascades and stores this location also. Savings account is having balance, savings account is having P name, savings account is having location also. So it makes use of this cascade and reads the content for the location and persists that into the DB. And this is unidirectional. From savings account you can pick a record from location. From here the reverse is not possible. Here in DB you can write a query, but here in entity point of view, if you see, savings account has the containment for location. Location is not having the containment for savings account. So that's why we call this as a unidirectional. So it's not bidirectional. It's not a bidirectional. Alright, now it's demo time. Let's go to Eclipse and start implementing this bean layer. Alright, in this video we are going to make changes for our bean layer. So we will close our entity classes which we opened as part of our previous video, savings account entity and location entity. So we closed both and we will move to our EJB Bean client remote interface, savings account Bean remote. Okay, first we will comment this method which was added as part of subseries 3 snippet 7. Now we will add a new snippet here. So the new snippet is nothing but adding 2 more parameter. The parameter which is relevant for the location. So that's the only change. For the current method. Okay, we'll take this. Okay, this will be 7.07. And now we will go to the Bean implementation. So EJB Bean, EJB module. So have a look at our existing method. We have savings account. We are creating instance for savings account. Then we are setting the balance and P name. After that we are making call to persist. Now we have to introduce the location entity here in between. So 7.08, which is nothing but our signature change. Now our method is implementing the modified remote interface method. Here if you see, we are creating the location, setting the city, street, as well as we are giving the created location to our account, savings account, and we are giving this location to it. Tube.coding examples .jpa entity. So that's all the code change required. We already talked about this. When we make a call to persist, this time the entity manager knows that there are 2 entities that comes into picture. The account is instance of a savings account which contains location, and we already populated that using the account.setLocation method, and by this call it will have the location contained inside the savings account. When The EM is nothing but our entity manager. When entity manager is persisting the content, it will persist the data into both the tables. Alright, that's all here in this video. Okay, let's test this once. Test in the sense we will start the server. If we keep on accumulating the changes, and later if we find there is some problem, then we may not pinpoint. Why? Because previously we started the server, and now when we are starting it, and if we get any error, then we know because of the delta change. Delta change means because of this code snippet 7.07 or code snippet 7.08, 7.09. Only these three pieces of information is giving trouble. So that's why for each chunk of change we need to start the server and check everything is working fine, and then undeploy the component and stop the server. That will be helpful for maintenance, not maintenance, for debugging if any error is encountered. Alright, now we started the server, and now we will deploy it. So warning, we can skip if there are error that we need to concentrate. Alright. So it doesn't have any error. We will stop the component. Undeployed. We will remove it. Okay. And we will stop the server. Alright, that's all here in this video. Thank you for watching. Bye.